Welcome to the Midlife Fulfilled podcast. Are you over 40 and ready to truly thrive? Well, on this podcast, we go deep on ways to thrive across the 5 pillars of midlife: health, fitness, career, relationships, and legacy. I'm Bernie Borges, midlife advocate, life coach, and your host. Subscribe now and get ready to thrive. Erich Kurschat, welcome to the Midlife Fulfilled podcast, a vulnerable conversation.
Thanks, Bernie. I'm excited to be talking with you today.
You're going to be vulnerable in this conversation, Erich?
I've shown up for it, so I have no choice at this point. I can't
You
run
have,
away
and I
with my tail
appreciate
between my legs.
that. Yeah. Well, let me give you a quick introduction. I'm sure we can learn more about you as we dive into the conversation, but I love how you are a self-proclaimed disc nerd, disc as in capital D, lowercase I, capital S, capital C, for more than 18 years. You are passionate about equipping individuals to communicate meaningfully and productively. You run a business called Harmony Insights, and you help organizations build high performing teams and revenue streams around the everything disc and 5 behaviors assessments. That gives you tremendous qualifications, Erich, for this conversation around the value of community. And the way that I would like to tee up our conversation around the value of community is on your LinkedIn profile, you have 9 belief statements. One of them is you say, I believe that introverts underestimate their ability to network professionally. What do you mean by that?
First, I want to mention I've had those up there for years. You may be only the second person that's ever referenced them in a conversation like this. And I don't know if that just means that they're buried and go unnoticed or just people don't feel compelled to comment. But I really appreciate not only that you saw them, but that you wanted to pull that into our conversation today because they're beliefs of mine. I hold them very
Yeah.
dearly and I feel strongly about them. I say they, I think maybe in the statement, and I think that's how you read it. It's sort of us, we. I am an introvert, and I put that there in part because I needed to believe more strongly in the strengths that I bring to professional networking. I started my business, Harmony Insights, however many years ago now. It came out of a corporate HR job and didn't have a network and didn't have a LinkedIn presence and really needed to figure it out, and immediately thought, well, I'm introverted. Like, this isn't something I do. I don't care for this. You want me to be in a room full of people I don't know? Like, that, I'd rather do anything else than that. And I had to come to a place where I recognized that in order to enjoy it, in order for it to be fruitful, I had to network in a way that made sense to me and was meaningful and fulfilling to me, not in a way that somebody else would do it. And I developed a conference session called Network Like an Introvert to surround myself by other people who are figuring it out themselves. And the rest is history.
Okay. Well, again, the theme for our conversation is the value of community. And I want to give a shout out to the community that you have built, at least the one that I'm familiar with. There may be others. And then you graciously invited me to be a member of this community, and it's called the HRHotSeat community. So why don't you? Oh, and by the way, I want to say something about that because you just finished saying that you're an introvert. And when I attended my first HR Hot Seat virtual event, I think there were what, 50, 60, 70? I don't remember how many people were there. Do you remember the number?
Yeah, I was around 50, just shy of 50, I think.
Okay. You emceed that event. You orchestrated that event masterfully. So the last thing someone would say is that you're an introvert. But anyway, I digress a little bit. You built this community, the HR Hot Seat community. And so it's all around the value of community. So give us a little context. Like, why did you build that community? What's it about? How does that sort of fulfill you?
I can come at this from a couple of different angles. I was coming out of a corporate HR role and starting my own business and needed a network and needed some visibility. And I thought this could be good marketing, to start what I'd been learning about at the time, a mastermind group, a traditional group of maybe 6 to 10 or 12 people that met regularly and tackled common challenges. I thought this could be good marketing for the disc business that I do. So in part, it was a marketing effort. In part, I, as an introvert, knew that I needed to do networking. I needed to network. And the experiences I was having were very superficial and transactional. I remember a speed networking event where I'm shoulder to shoulder and then you talk for a minute, you shift, and like it was just chaos. And I
Yeah.
thought there's nothing meaningful about this. I want to create the community that I would want to be a part of. I wasn't even thinking in terms of community at the time. It really was meant to be a traditional mastermind group. And now, over 8 years later, we have over 3,500 members. And at one point, got up to 14 chapters. It's taken on a life of its own. And yes, I am an introvert organizing all of this. And we can certainly get into that if you'd like. But I believe very strongly that there is value in community. And I wanted to build the community that I didn't feel existed.
Okay. A couple of things you said that I want to make sure they don't get lost. You just said, Eric, that that community is up to over 3,500 members.
Yes.
3,500, 3,500 members. That is an amazing accomplishment. I hope that you occasionally stop and smell the roses and pat yourself on the back and just take it all in and just appreciate that achievement. 3,500 members and whatever the number of chapters is, that's truly, truly, truly amazing. And I want to come back to something you just said because you said you wanted to start networking when you started your business. But what you did is you created an environment where people can network by joining versus building. So
Mhm.
why don't you speak to that?
So I've thought about this over time. Initially, I was the joiner. I identified where my target audience was, in this case HR folks. I wanted to stay close to that function, but also I do a lot of business with and through HR people. And so I thought I'm going to go where they are. And so I went to local HR organizations and associations and I was enjoying that experience. I was speaking, I was attending events as an attendee and a volunteer, but I recognized very quickly that I sort of craved the experience of being the reason that people were coming together. So I needed to go from joining communities, and there's nothing wrong with that in and of itself if people kind of hang out there for a bit, to a place where I was building community and that people were showing up and getting value in part because of what I had to say and how I was facilitating, but in part because of their interactions with one another. And then even if they never interacted with me, they left having had such a good time, such a valuable time that they couldn't help but associate in some way that value with the fact that I was a part of it. And I came to feel very strongly about the power of not only community in general, certainly joining communities, but whenever possible, even as a novice, building community around you and being intentional about what that looks like.
Well, speaking from my own experience, having attended my first HR Hot Seat event recently, virtual event, I can tell you for a fact, and I'm sure you saw it, comments from the attendees about what a great host you are, what a great leader you are of the community. And everyone appreciates your leadership. Everyone appreciates your authenticity, your engagement. You care for the community, and it's again, it's authentic. So again, and it's very well recognized. So kudos to that. And
Can
so
I
I just
interject just long enough to say, Bernie, I need a miniature version of you on my shoulder that I can carry around at all times for when I start to doubt those things.
But I can appreciate that because we all, even extroverts and confident people, we all have those moments where we need a little pat on the back or a little bit of
Yeah.
reinforcement. So it's called being human. So but I can appreciate that. And by the way, you can call on me anytime, Eric, to be that little voice on
We're
your
that tight.
shoulder.
I love it.
You also talk about the importance of diverse contributions in a community setting.
Mhm.
What's that about?
So when you get two or more people in the same space, all kinds of things happen. I think you can get magic, if there's collaboration there and people are different, bringing different perspectives and viewpoints. There can be conflict, and everybody has their own relationship with conflict. Some people kind of avoid it at all costs, as I've been known to do on occasion, and other people embrace it and sort of manage it productively. I think it can be a valuable thing. Um, can lead to innovation and productivity, all sorts of things. But I really spend a lot of time, especially in the disc work that I do in 5 behaviors of a cohesive team, thinking about this idea that we are stronger as a community the more diverse our perspectives and lived experiences and interests and values really are. And if I showed up in a room full of Erics, maybe we'd have great conversations about certain things, but at some point, like, we're going to look around and say, geez, we could use an outside perspective on some of the stuff that we're discussing. And a mastermind group, certainly, but, a mastermind community for sure. Honestly, a community of any sort is going to thrive on that cognitive diversity, so that you're embracing diversity, but you're also being inclusive in the process. And we won't go off on a tangent on how DEI is sort of in the crosshairs at this point, but I hold strongly that there is such value in bringing diverse people together, whatever the purpose.
Sure, sure. No, I completely understand your point. You mentioned DISC. That's who you are professionally. One of your 9 belief statements, Eric, is you say, I believe that the DISC personality assessment is an invaluable resource. So for those, and I'm not terribly familiar with DISC in terms of at a detailed level, why don't you unpack that a little bit for us?
DISC is one of the leading personality assessments, workplace assessments in the marketplace. And there are 4 primary styles: D, I, S, and C. They all stand for different things. We don't have to get into too much of the details now, but the idea behind it is twofold, really. Number one, I can be a more productive contributor. I can connect more meaningfully and productively with other people if I better understand myself, my preferences and tendencies in the workplace. In what environments do I best work? And what communication styles do I prefer? And then, second, once I understand me, if I can come to understand you and get a sense that there is such a thing as cognitive diversity, that we all have different comfort zones, so to speak, I can do something about that. I can take that information and optimally adapt to you when I have the chance and say, okay, I'm going to have a conversation with Bernie. The way that I would typically approach this project might not necessarily be the most efficient way about it or the most productive way. What language does Bernie speak? Can I come to understand and speak that language myself, such that when we connect, you walk away feeling seen and heard and respected and celebrated in ways that you may never have felt before? DISC is just a shared language that an organization can use to facilitate that conversation.
So it sounds like then having an understanding of DISC can be beneficial in a community environment, right? Because you can be more perceptive about those around you and maybe engage a little bit more effectively. Is that right?
Even if you're not, and you didn't imply this, but even if you're not an expert in DISC, just that awareness, that curiosity to say, all right, I'm going to step into a room now with all kinds of people, many, probably most of whom don't see the world the way that I do, kind of come at it through a different lens. Instead of pushing back against that and seeing those differences as harmful in any way, detrimental, I can embrace them and be curious and say, geez, how does Bernie see things? And how can I not necessarily begin to see them that way going forward myself, but appreciate and acknowledge and leverage those differences in a way that is going to be beneficial to us as a community, not only to me as an individual.
Now, Eric, one of your other 9 belief statements is you say that I believe in the possibility of meaningful, fulfilling work. And of course, this is the Midlife Fulfilled podcast. So, fulfilling work, I think, resonates to me and certainly to my listening and viewing audience. So, what's your experience been around that? Because just a quick other comment to kind of set the stage for this part of the conversation. I have observed both anecdotally and through research that I published last year that sometimes meaningful work in our midlife seasons is challenging to find.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I wouldn't doubt that. I'd love to read more about that. I think it's challenging to find, in part perhaps because it's challenging to define. That you may have very well gone the majority of your working life doing things, doing work that is not fulfilling. You've done work because you've had to do it. It's the quickest way to a paycheck. You've had mouths to feed. I just welcomed 2 new babies, identical twin girls, into my family, and I feel this real pressure to earn, and
Congratulations.
thank you. And if business got slow for me, I mean, I'm not above filling out an application at Costco, for example, and people have to do that to make ends meet. And so I've often said that meaningful, fulfilling, rewarding work is a luxury, that if you have the opportunity to consider it and define what that means for you and pursue it, and you have the time to really land in a place that you're doing something, incredibly rewarding, that's a unique opportunity, maybe a privileged opportunity. There's certainly an argument to be made for that. And I really do have a passion for helping others define what that looks like for them. And if possible, pursue it and achieve it.
Yeah, Eric, I mentioned the report that I published last year, Thriving in Midlife Report. There's an interesting data point that I've referenced a few times on the podcast, and it's the following: 61% of respondents said that they were fulfilled in their career. Then later in the survey, 75% said that they were satisfied in their career. So 75% said they're satisfied, 61% said they're fulfilled. And then there's another question that says, if you could only be fulfilled or happy, which one would you choose? 79% chose fulfillment. So I posit that as a result of those three data points, fulfillment is a higher bar. Notice 61% said they're fulfilled in their career, 75% said they're satisfied in their career. Fulfillment is a higher bar. Would you
Yeah.
agree?
I would imagine so, and it's such an individual conversation. I mean, I have friends that say, I work to live, and others that say I live to work. Some people who want to find just very deep meaning in the work that they do and feel that it aligns with their deepest held values, and other people who say, honestly, it's 8 hours a day where I can earn a paycheck and come home and really enjoy myself. So it's such an individual conversation. But in terms of the data points that you served up, yeah, I would say that fulfillment is, to be satisfied isn't a glowing review of your job. Yeah, I'm satisfied. It's like, all right, but then when somebody says I'm fulfilled, that's next level. I mean,
Yeah.
this is just off the top of my head. There may be another level yet, and that's inspired. That's something beyond fulfilled. It's sort of implying that there's more to be achieved or more to be enjoyed, or something beyond I'm getting what I need out of this job, even if it's in the deepest sense. I don't know. Do you have any
Yeah.
thoughts on that?
No, I would agree. I would agree. The next level of inspired is an interesting one because I wonder how many people think about that. Think in terms of being inspired. To
Yeah.
your point, a lot of people look at their job as a job and not a place for inspiration.
Yeah.
So I think it would require doing some research to really test the theme of inspiration, correlated to career in order to really gain deeper understanding. In the meantime, I think it's an interesting thought. And I'll tell you what, Eric, when I do the 2025 survey later this year, I will include inspiration in the survey.
I was just going to say, I will wait with bated breath for your next white paper.
Yep. Well, again, so you have, boy, here's some really cheesy pun. You've inspired me to include inspiration in this
I'll
year's
take it.
survey. Okay, enough of that. Eric, I want to come back to one of your other nine statements because it's on a topic that I feel very strongly about, and that topic is communication. So I have said for a long, long time that communication is the hardest thing we do in life. In life. Now,
Yeah.
you have it framed up within the workplace. You say you believe that workplace communication can be productive, collaborative, and respectful. You want to elaborate on that?
Yeah, I like what you say, that communication can be the hardest thing, and I've said that in a different way. I've talked, when I've done some career coaching, I've talked about the unique challenges of defining meaningful work, as we've already talked about. What does that look like? But then the exercise of communicating that to somebody else, or to recognize that this is what I value in life, but then putting those values into words. I've heard it said, and I'll probably botch this, but the like thoughts clarify themselves, passing over lips and through pencil tips. And that's kind
Mm,
of the communication piece. So the moment you can speak
yeah.
something aloud or write it down, you are clear on whatever sort of, is going on, up top in the workplace. Then it's communication is central. And I mean, maybe speaking from the point of view of an introvert, I went probably an excessive amount of time heads down in a cube on Excel, during my corporate HR career. and there's a certain amount of communication in that, but there are days where I avoided colleagues and others because I felt like they may have been a distraction. The moment I opened up to the value of collaboration and connecting meaningfully with other people and producing together instead of on my own, um, it's there's value in that. You learn very quickly though that with that cognitive diversity that we talked about previously, without a shared language, for example, like DISC or other assessments out there, that communication piece becomes especially tricky. And I kind of live in a sense to help shepherd others through that challenge.
You may have just answered the question that I want to ask you next in your last statement, but I'll ask you
Check.
anyway because you can elaborate. And that is, what is the role of communication in community?
All right. So community then sort of implies that we are coming together as individuals. You don't want to lose your individuality in the process. You're showing up as somebody with unique gifts and strengths and contributions. But if they start and end with you, I'd imagine that's a travesty. That's a shame, right? So I'd imagine the role that the communication plays in community is being able to show up and say, this is the value that I bring. We are aligned in some way. We have something in common within this community, as typically is the case with communities. How can I contribute to that? What do you need to know of me in terms of my strengths, but then also my potential limitations and challenges, such that we can get where we're going, if not faster, maybe more effectively or more meaningfully, or you can fill in the blank however you want. But if I show up with, tight lips and kind of a hesitation in terms of what I'm sharing with other people and how vulnerable I'm willing to be in the process, maybe sort of conflict avoidant at times, you're hampering communication in a way that is certainly going to keep that community from operating, you know, at, on full cylinder. That's not the way that I want to put it. Optimally.
Okay, that's okay because I can't resist the opportunity to really give another shout out to your HR hot seat community because one of the things that you do, and again, you do this just so well, is you break up. I think you said there were 50 people ish. You break us up into groups, small groups, and then you distribute us into virtual rooms. We each pick a topic. We have conversation around it for a good amount of time,
Hmm.
and then we come back and there's a spokesperson from each room that sort of summarizes that. So there's communication beforehand with you and everybody. And then there's the small group where we're all communicating amongst each other and then coming back into the bigger setting. So it really contributes to the community. And the communication aspect of it is very, very, it's effective. It works.
I appreciate you pointing that out. And it's also working on other levels that people may not be aware. So I've communicated with attendees in advance such so that our time together is as beneficial as it can be. So I've coached people in advance, which includes some communication. The challenges that we are tackling together, the solutions for those challenges often come back to effective communication. So whether you're trying to get buy-in from your leadership team, or you're trying to figure out how to increase adoption for a new um, training program you've put into place, whatever it happens to be, we have found that communication ends up being a theme, which is great. It's music to my ears. I don't plug disc every time it comes up, but I'm very certain to underscore the fact that so often we just come back to effective communication being so beneficial.
Yeah. Communication it's just key. Like I said, I think it's the hardest thing we do in life. And since we spend, I think, the number is 2/3 of our waking hours in a work environment for those that are still working, which I think most people that listen to this podcast, not all, are still working. And so we spend a lot of time doing that. So communication is key. Now, I have one final statement that I want to read, belief statement that I want to read from your LinkedIn profile. And so this will be the final one before we bring to a wrap. And I saved, I don't want to say the best, but maybe my favorite topic,
Okay.
Eric, because, I'm focused on leadership at this point in my life and legacy building through leadership. And you say you believe that each one of us is capable of leading with greater influence. You want to unpack that?
Yeah. So I came to influence kind of through the term sales. And I was building my business, and I was reading and listening to books having to do with sales, how to close sales, how to pitch, etc. And there's something about that. And I understood the value of that as a small business owner. But there's something about the word sales that just didn't sit right with me. You know, Daniel Pink has a book called To Sell is Human, and he makes the point that we're all in the business of influencing and moving and persuading other people.
Hmm.
And I don't know if I came about influence in that book or if it was elsewhere, but I thought that's a word and a concept I can sink my teeth into. Sales doesn't feel right to me. It's just not aligned with kind of how I view the work that I do, and even talking about the work that I do. But when it comes to influencing others, I saw the value in that.
Hmm.
And so I thought, you know what? I don't think that only applies to me. I think each one of us in some way may be limited in terms of how we view our potential as leaders. Well, I'm not, I don't have enough experience. I have too much experience, so I'm jaded, or I'm not at the right season in life to be a leader. I'm just uncomfortable with the title. And then our influence as a result ends up being limited. And I love the idea that there's more for each of us. There's more that each of us is capable of doing if we truly showed up self-aware, confident to the extent that we're able to, and embrace this idea that whether or not we have the title, we're each in a position to lead.
Yes, and so just that last point you just made, whether or not we have the title, that's exactly the point that I want to add, and then we'll wrap. And that is that you don't need a title. You don't need a role. You don't need to be designated as a leader. You just need to be in a situation where you recognize an opportunity to act in some way with influence,
Yeah,
hopefully positive influence. That's leading.
yeah.
And I think that's a great wrap point, Eric. Before I let you go, please tell us if someone listening, watching would like to connect with you. How can they connect with you and get into your world?
I appreciate you offering, and I really wish your conversations went twice as long because I feel like there's still so much more we have to talk about. Harmonyinsights.com. My company is called Harmony Insights LLC, so you can find out about me there. HRHotSeat.com is where my HR community lives. It's entirely free. And then I probably spend far too much time on LinkedIn. So if you just find Erich Kurschat, that's Erich Kurschat, we can engage there as well.
Well, thank you, Eric. I would love to continue this conversation as well, and maybe we'll do that offline. And my listener knows that all those links are linked up in the show notes for this episode. So, Eric, I want to thank you for joining me for this episode of the Midlife Fulfill podcast, a vulnerable conversation around all things community and leadership and self awareness and DISC, how all of those magically come together to give us an environment. And HR Hot Seat, which again, I just want to give a shout out to you. Thank you for inviting me to join. It's a wonderful community. Anybody's listening, check it out if that sounds of interest to you. Eric, just thank you again. Really appreciate your time today.
Well, Bernie, not only has it been a satisfying conversation, it's been a fulfilling conversation. So thank you for
I'll take it.
that.
I'll take it. I'll take it.